Charles Darwin, 1859, has defined evolution as descent with modification, i.e., closely related species resembling one another because of their inheritance and differing from one another because of the hereditary differences accumulated during the separation of their ancestors. In other words, evolution is the process by which related populations diverge from one another, giving rise to new species, or higher groups. Dodson and Dodson, 1976. Now, most of the evolutionary biologists envisage that the present-day varied forms of life of the planet Earth have evolved during the past history of Earth by undergoing the following two steps of evolutionary process. 1. Inorganic, chemical or molecular evolution and origin of life. In the first step of evolution took place the development of non-living matter into living matter or evolution of non-life into life. Thus, during chemical evolution, that occurred about 4,600 millions of years ago, subatomic particles aggregated to form atoms of different elements. Elements evolved into simple inorganic molecules. Simple inorganic molecules gave origin to organic micromolecules such as amino acids, and micromolecules developed into macromolecules such as proteins by self-assembly process. Certain macromolecules developed the ability of self-duplication and aggregated to form first primitive living systems, called eobionts. Eobionts evolved into prokaryotic cells which formed the kingdom Monera. 2. Organic and biological evolution and origin of species. The second step of evolution was started from the culmination point of chemical evolution, i.e., origin of life. The concept of organic evolution holds that all the varied kinds of animals and plants which are now known, have developed out of earlier types by completely natural, gradual but continuous changes during the passage of time. According to G. L. Stebbins, 1976, organic evolution is a series of partial or complete and irreversible transformations of the genetic composition of populations, based principally upon altered interactions with their environment. It consists chiefly of adaptive radiations into new environments, adjustments to environmental changes that take place in a particular habitat, and the origin of new ways for exploiting existing habitats. These adaptive changes occasionally give rise to greater complexity of developmental pattern, of physiological reactions, and of interactions between populations and their environment. The product of organic evolution is the origin of species, or evolution of old species into new species. For example, during organic evolution under certain environmental stresses, certain autotrophic, heterotrophic, anaerobic and aerobic prokaryotic cells of kingdom Monera started symbiotic relationship and evolved into eukaryotic plant and animal cells to form kingdom Protista. Margulis, 1970. Later on, kingdom Protista evolved and gave origin to three kingdoms, Plantae, Metaphyta, fungi and Animalia, metazoa, by adaptive radiation or cladogenesis, figure 1.1. The branch of biology which incorporates in it the studies concerning the problems of chemical evolution and origin of life and organic evolution and origin of man and other present-day organismal species of the planet Earth, is called evolutionary biology. C. Meyer, 1970, Self, 1972. FACTOFEVOLUTION. The concept of evolution is based on detailed comparisons of the structures of living and fossil forms, on the sequences of appearance and extinction of species in past ages, on the physiological and biochemical similarities and differences between species, and an analysis of the genetic constitution of present-day plants and animals. In fact, various branches of biology such as paleontology, comparative anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, embryology, taxonomy, geographic distribution, ecology, animal behavior, domestication techniques and population genetics have furnished strong support to the idea of evolution. Now most biologists accept the fact that organisms have evolved and are still evolving, though no biologist has actually seen the origin of a major group of organism by evolution. In fact, certain races and species have been produced by duplicating in the laboratory some of the evolutionary processes such as mutation, selection, isolation, etc., which are known to take place in nature. The main reason that major steps in evolution have never been observed is that they require millions of years to be completed. The evolutionary processes which gave rise to major groups of organisms, such as kingdom Plantae, kingdom fungi, kingdom Animalia, kingdom Protista equals kingdom Monera. Progenote L. Very primitive anaerobic life. Figure 1.1. Family tree showing organic evolution of kingdom Monera into kingdom Protista and latter's evolution into kingdoms Plantae, fungi and Animalia. Genera and families took place in the remote past, long before there were people to observe them. Nevertheless, the facts, i.e., evidences of organic evolution, we know about these origins provide very strong circumstantial evidence to indicate that the processes which brought them about were very similar to those found in modern groups of animals and plants. Evolution compared with A.N.C. Ianthisto Rai. Certain authors of evolutionary biology such as 1971 have compared the evolution with the ancient history. According to them, the state of our knowledge of the major steps of evolution which took in the past is much like that of our knowledge of ancient history. We do not have any reliable eyewitness account of the events which produced the rise and fall of the civilizations of ancient India, Egypt, Samaria, Babylon and Crete, and the contemporary written records of these ancient times are fragmentary and unreliable. Nevertheless, the indirect evidences that these civilizations existed are so strong that it is accepted by scholars and laymen alike. Moreover, we teach as historical fact many of the probable events connected with their rise and fall. The evidence which biologists now have about the rise and extinction of major groups of animals in past geological eras is of a very similar nature, and carries with it about the same degree of high probability. A preview of evolution. Evolution is a process of gradual development of organisms through time includes the following characteristics. 1. Basically, evolution is the result of the differential survival in each generation of the progeny of individuals with certain special characteristics. In turn, these adaptive characteristics in part account for the differential survival. 2. Mechanism of inheritance is the foremost important element which plays an important role in evolution. The ways in which genes determine the expression of characters in an organism and the manner in which genes are transmitted to the offspring shape the whole evolutionary picture. Evolution is often defined as changes in the frequency of genes in a population. In turn, the organization of genes in chromosomes and the behavior of these during cell division affect the mechanisms of inheritance and evolution. 3. Normally, sexual reproduction has far much evolutionary significance than asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is a mechanism that tends to combine the genetic materials of individuals and produce new and novel combinations. Its effect is a tremendous increase in variability, and the advantages of this are so great that the phenomenon has become almost universal in all plants and animals. Sexuality apparently developed very early in the evolutionary history of organisms. 4. Without sexuality and interbreeding, species as we know them today would not exist. But just as important for the evolution, particularly the multiplication of species, has been the development of barriers, viz. Isolating mechanisms to the free exchange of genes, be they geographical, ecological, behavioral, or genetical. The very simple earliest organisms may have been able to mix their genes with others of the same level of organization, but present-day organisms, with elaborate and complicated developmental pathways, cannot exchange genes with drastically different organisms. When they do, the result of these exchanges is lethality or at best sterility. The selective advantage of barriers that prevent gene exchange in such instances is obvious. 5. In a slightly different sense, it also can be said that evolution is shaped by environment. Differential survival is always partly due to capacity to adapt to the environment, particularly the physical environment. Chemical evolution could occur only after our planet changed from the original ball of fire to a body where water could accumulate. Organic evolution, which has produced the tremendous number of organisms, is in part a consequence of the adaptation of these organisms to the infinite types of environments found on Earth. Thus, the evolution is the result of the interplay of many and diverse factors. These factors are themselves subjected to change. Early in the history of each lineage of plants and animals, structures or processes have developed which have profoundly influenced the evolutionary history of that group. So, for example, a segmented body and an exoskeleton have been major factors in the success of the insects, but in turn these same factors have restricted the size and habits of the members of the class Insecta. Recently, evolution is studied in the terms of genes and population genetics. The genes have been recognized as the ultimate causes of existent unity and diversity of various populations. The genes change by point mutations, which are primarily alterations of base pairs of DNA molecules that find their initial phenotypic expressions as amino acid substitutions in proteins. Mutations are raw materials of evolution. Some genotypes survive and reproduce better than others and, hence, gain in relative gene frequencies. This is, by definition, the process of evolution by natural selection. In simple terms, evolution is the shift in the frequency of genes within total populations, and most such shifts of a sustained nature are due to natural selection. Natural selection is never perfect in its operation. Many unfavorable genes are always being either phased out or renewed by mutation. Some genes are selected against in the homozygous state but favored when in heterozygous state. These elements of imperfection constitute the genetic load. While reducing the immediate adaptiveness of organisms, they increase adaptability of future generations by providing genetic flexibility to cope with changes in the environment. Some evolutions also occur by random fluctuations in the gene frequency, called genetic drift, at least temporarily outside the influence of natural selection. In spite of the irregularities of the evolutionary process, natural selection always tends to make the populations fit more precisely to the existing environment. But the environment is constantly shifting and populations are consequently forced to track it. They are always little behind. If they fall too far behind, they become extinct. Species are populations that diverge enough from each other during evolution to become reproductively isolated. At this critical juncture in their history, they are free to evolve along their own paths and to disperse to new distributions that are different from those of all other genetically similar populations. Certain misconceptions OFEVOLUTIONARYBIOIOGY. The idea of evolution is a very popular one, but unfortunately various misconceptions have crept in the minds of biologists and laymen about it during its extension and popularization. Some of these misconceptions and subsequent clarification of each of them are the following. 1. If the layman is asked the meaning of the word evolution, he is likely to reply, man came from monkeys. The shortcoming of the layman's definition lies in the fact that he pictures one modern form as descended from another modern form. Man and monkeys are contemporaries, both are products of long evolution. The relationship existing between monkey and man, rather than being a father-to-son relationship, is more comparable to cousin-to-cousin relationship. As one and his cousin have a pair of grandparents in common, similarly modern man and modern monkey are thought as having shared a common ancestor in the distant past. From this common ancestor both inherited some characteristics in which they still resemble each other. Was this common ancestor a man or a monkey? He was neither. He was a form that had the potentiality to give rise to a monkey on the one hand or to give rise to a man, on the other hand. There is no evidence that any of the modern monkeys have that potentiality. Moody, 1970. 2. The phrase, survival of the fittest, is Darwin's, but it is clear from his writings that he did not mean it literally. It was the British philosopher Herbert Spencer, 1820-1903, who popularized the idea in his works and in his concept of social evolution. In the historical context of the times, the idea of struggle between individuals with the winner, the fittest, surviving to get the spoils was appealing to certain groups. In translating organic evolution to the social scene, Spencer misinterpreted the main idea, that is, differential survival of the progeny. He replaced it with one element of natural selection, differential mortality due to better adaptations to the environment, and interposed the idea of direct competition as responsible for differential mortality. The ideas as presented are entirely his, and have no scientific backing. We must keep always in mind that by the fittest, Darwin meant the one with the largest surviving progeny. This can be and often as a comparatively weak individual. In this sense, rabbits are fitter than lions, in spite of man, than lions. 3. Another important point to understand is that no moral judgment of any sort can be read into evolution. Evolved organisms are not better, in a moral sense, they are only better adapted to the environment they occupy compared to their extinct ancestors. Evolution is as blind as justice is supposed to be. Those with the largest surviving progeny will multiply regardless of how good or bad humans may consider them. O.T. Solbrig, 1966. SIGNIFICANCEOFEVOLUTIONARY BIOIAG. The theory of evolution is quite rightly called the greatest unifying theory in biology. The diversity of organisms, similarities and differences between various kinds of organisms, patterns of distribution and behavior, adaptation and interaction, all this was merely bewildering chaos of facts until given meaning by the evolutionary theory. There is no area of biology in which that theory does not serve as an ordering principle. The distinguished evolutionist Theodosius Dobzhansky, 1973, has aptly said, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." For more than a century, the theory of evolution has exerted a very strong influence on our thinking about biology, also on developments in other disciplines such as sociology, politics, economics and religion. RUAYRIO number 10, SNN. Define the evolutionary biology. L. Development. Organic. Key idea. Organic evolution. Key idea that the present forms of life have arisen from the earlier, simpler ones was far from new when Charles Darwin published his book, The Origin of Species, in 1859. The development of the idea of organic evolution through pre-Darwinian, Darwinian, and post-Darwinian eras can be studied under the following periods. 1. Period of obscurity. The oldest speculations about evolution are found in the classical mythologies of different centers of ancient cultures, such as India, China, Babylon and Egypt. For instance, the classical Indian Hindu mythology has forwarded the idea that universe and the body of all living beings are made up of 5 elements or Panchbhuta, namely Shiti, earth, ap, water, tiha, fire, marut, air, and Vayom, void or sky. Further, the Padam Puran conceived 10 incarnations or Dashvataras for explaining the evolution of vertebrates. The sequence of avatars includes Matsya, fish-like appearance, Kurma, reptile-like, Varaha, mammal-like, Narasimha, half-man and half-lion, Vamana, the dwarf man-like appearance anthropoid Parsharama, a Homo sapiens of Pleistocene, Sri Rama, Balrama, Sri Krishna, and Kalpi. The latter 4 incarnations depict the formation of clans and communities. A view of the Galapagos Island. W. Pipe. Similar to ancient Indians, the ancient Chinese conceive the world at the beginning is made up of 5 primary elements: water, wood, fire, soil, and the precious metal, gold. According to their mythology, the positive and negative interactions of these primary 5 elements were responsible for the origin of life, and different kinds of adaptations and diversities of organisms or things were originated from a single source through gradual unfolding and branching. The Egyptian and the Babylonians gave the idea of cosmic evolution, which included the following aspects: I. A divine intelligence and creator, E. Water as a primitive and boundless substance, E. The potentiality of all things in the divine intelligence, and IV. Creation as the process of becoming actual by stages. During this period, because the speculation on evolution idea was much shrouded in mystery and mythology, so, this period has come to be known as the period of obscurity. 2. Period of ancient Greeks and Romans. The classical writings of certain Greek philosophers contain the vague ideas and speculations about the organic evolution. Thus, Thales, 624 to 548 BC, suggested aquatic origin of life, i.e., all life originated from oceans. Anaximander, 611-547 BC, explained the origin of universe. According to him, living things came from primordial fluid and men were first formed as fishes. Eventually they cast off their fish skin and took up life on dry land. Anaximenes, 382 to 524 BC, believed that life came from air and he proposed abiogenesis. Xenophanes, 576 to 480 BC, is credited with being the first person to recognize that fossils, such as petrified shells embedded in rocks, represent the remains of animals that once lived. He also realized that the presence of fossils of marine animals on what is now dry land indicates that the sea once covered the area. He believed that in ancient times Earth was covered with water where life began. Empedocles, 495 to 435 BC, is considered as the father of evolution idea by many evolutionists for his ideas which he forwarded in his Poem of Nature. According to him, life arose spontaneously but gradually, and change, evolution, would result when twin forces, the attraction and repulsion, interact with each other. Based on it, he further explained that first living things were cast out in the form of separate parts, and by chance these parts were united by attraction force, and as a result plants and animals were born. The sex originated later, and through reproduction the developing embryo resulted from both paternal and maternal substances, and in that fashion distinct species were formed. He believed that when reproduction was established, Earth felt no need of special creation of organism. According to Empedocles, plants came earlier than animals and perfect forms replaced imperfect types. Aristotle discarded Empedocles' views, and he observed that organisms could be arranged in graded series from lower to higher. The lowest stage is the inorganic. Organic beings arose from the inorganic by direct metamorphosis. He conceived the organic world to consist of 3 states. 1. Plants. 2. Plant animals, a transitional group in which he included sponges and sea anemones. 3. Animals, characterized by feeling or sensibility. Within the animal groups he constructed a genetic series leading from the lowest forms up to man, placed at the apex. Aristotle is considered as the father of family trees. From this taxonomic fact, he drew the correct inference that one higher group evolved from other lower one in the taxonomic series. However, he had the metaphysical belief that the gradual evolution of living things occurred because nature strives to change from the simple and imperfect to the more complex and perfect. An evolutionary explanation of the origin of plants and animals was given by the Roman poet Lucretius, 99–55 BC. In his poem De Rerum Natura. Aristotle. 3. Pre-Darwinian period. The medieval period is characterized as Dark Age. During this period, superstition and blind following of ancient thinkers prevailed, and Aristotelian reasoning and the spirit of scientific inquiry were died out. Thus, no progress occurred in the idea of evolution during medieval period. With the Renaissance, interest in the natural sciences quickened, and the increasing knowledge of many kinds of animals led more and more scientists to consider the concept of evolution favorably. Thus, before Charles Darwin, several possible mechanisms have been proposed to account for the evolution. Some of them have been considered here as follows. I. Fixity, design and creation. Nulli speciae novi equals no species new was the catchphrase for the early systematists, including Linnaeus, 1707–1778. Species were the units of creation as prescribed in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, and Charles Darwin, 1809–1882. Therefore, immutable. Moreover, the reason they were so well fitted for the challenges presented by everyday life was that they had been designed by God for specific functions in nature. John Ray, 1627–1705, clergyman, naturalist and early systematist, saw the fitness of species as evidence for the existence of a designer, and this argument from design was made even more clear later by William Paley, 1743–1805. According to early systematists, animals and plants are wonderful bits of machinery, more wonderful than any man-made machine, and so they must be the product of an intelligence more wonderful than that of man. There was a latter, more subtle, version of this argument which insisted on the harmony of form rather than utility. These are described as the idealists and utilitarian positions respectively. This creationist concept held certain biological, theological and philosophical problems. For example, many fossilized organisms had been discovered that no longer existed on Earth, and yet it was unbelievable that the perfect products of an omnipotent designer could ever have become obsolete. Georges Cuvier, 1769–1832, a very influential French biologist and founder of paleontology, offered catastrophic hypothesis as a way out. A series of catastrophes, fires and floods, e.g., Noah's flood, had removed some of the species initially created by God. Apparently useless characters were another worry because inferior design could hardly be attributed to a super-intelligent designer. To explain certain useless characters, e.g., Toes of Pig, Buffon, 1707–1788, suggested that the Supreme Being had created perfectly designed types embodied in the original species, but that new species arose from them by a process of hybridization and degeneration. Thus, the ass was supposed to be a degenerate horse and the ape a degenerate man. But this meant that the assumption of strict fixity of species had to be relaxed, and the concept of nulli speciae novi disappeared from the last, revised edition of the book, Systema Natura of Linnaeus. Linnaeus, though, was not an evolutionist, nor was he greatly concerned with explanations of nature, but he devoted his life industriously in arranging the kinds of animals and plants known to him in a convenient system. This system he took to be actual and fixed. To discover it and use it was the major task of natural history. He broke the tradition in placing man, the knowing Linnaeus, 1707–1778. 1. Homo sapiens, in the animal kingdom, the class Mammalia and the order Primates. Of many categories employed today in classification, it is interesting that Linnaeus used only the kingdom, class, order, genus, and species, but other naturalists soon found it advantageous to divide the animal and plant kingdoms into phyla and to divide orders into families. However, when Linnaeus established his idea of species, he created a dilemma that a species is real, objective and retains its identity in nature instead of shifting haphazardly or spontaneously changing its characteristics. Thus, his idea of special creation and of immutability of species caused a serious hindrance to the development of the evolution idea. Programmed evolution. Some of the liberal medieval scholars considered the story of creation in Genesis to be a myth. For example, Augustine, 353–430, likened the work of the Creator to the progressive growth of a tree, and Aquinas, 1225–1274, similarly saw creation as a process whereby the powers given to the matter by God progressively unfolded. It was in this sense that Charles Bonnet, 1720–1793, and Treviranus, 1776–1853, were of the opinion that the design of all lifeforms was contained as germs in the first being. However, Bonnet conceived of this unfolding as the working out of a rigidly determined program of change, whereas Treviranus saw evolution as the calling into play of an endless variety of form assumptions programmed into each organism by the Creator, according to the needs of survival in a changing world. Thus, organisms and environment interacted to generate all extant and extinct species. These views of the world, as a giant organism endowed with a mysterious developmental impulse, can be traced back to Plato, 427 to 347 BC. And were carried forward into the 18th and even 19th century by evolutionists as Goethe, 1749-1831, Kant, 1724-1804, and Chambers, 1802-1871. These workers are called nature philosophers. Less rigidly programmed evolution. Erasmus Darwin, 1731-1807, Charles Darwin's grandfather, wrote about the process of evolution in his book Zoonomia, 1794, and poem Temple of Nature. He proposed a less rigid system of determined evolution based on the acquisition of new characters by the organisms themselves. Erasmus was the first to express clearly that millions of years have been required for the process of organic evolution and that all life arose from one primordial protoplasmic mass. Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, 1744-1820, formulated a strikingly similar theory in his Philosophie zoologique, 1809. Both of these theories involve the following three main principles. 1. All organisms were supposed to have an innate power to progress towards a more complex and perfect form. For Erasmus Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, this faculty to improve by its own inherent activity was God-given, 1744-1820. But for Lamarck, innate power was supposed to emerge out of the organization of living beings. Subtle fluids, caloric and electricity, flowed through the organism not only maintaining order but also establishing more order. 2. All organisms had an inner disposition, what Lamarck called a sentiment intérieur, which caused the performance of actions sufficient to meet the needs, survival, created by a changing environment. The environment does not cause change, it causes the need for change, which is recognized and acted upon by the organism. A mysterious principle did the job for Erasmus, but the subtle fluid did it for Lamarck. 3. Characters acquired through new use were transmissible from one generation to another by a process which was never clearly defined by Lamarck. Similarly, characters lost through disuse in one generation did not reappear in future generations. Using these principles, Lamarck explained the evolution of tentacles in the head of snail in the following way. As the snail crawls along, it finds the need to touch objects in front of it and makes efforts to touch them with the foremost part of its head. In so doing, it sends subtle fluids into these extensions. Ultimately, nerves grow into them and the tentacles are made permanent. These acquired tentacles are transmitted from parent to offsprings, i.e., they are heritable. Lamarckism was supported by E. Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire, 1772, 1844, Robert Chambers, 1802-1871, and Herbert Spencer, 1802, 1903, but bitterly opposed by G. Cuvier, 1769-1832, and Weismann, 1887. 4. Darwinian period. Charles Darwin, 1809-1882, and Alfred Russel Wallace, 1823-1913, both spent many years in collecting and exploring South America and certain islands of its sea, and both independently drew similar conclusions about the possible mechanism of organic evolution due to natural selection. After studying the Essay on Population by Malthus, 1789, which suggested that human populations continually tend to outstrip the availability of food supply, but are kept in check by natural diseases, and famine, and man-made wars. Darwin-Wallace theory of natural selection was published in the Journal of the Linnaean Society in July, 1858. Darwin seemed to agree with Lamarck's idea that characters acquired during the life of an organism might be transmissible, in a British naturalist Alfred Wallace heredity sense, to its offspring, e.g., Darwin's theory of pangenesis. 1823-1913, wrote to Darwin from. However, it was on the mechanism of evolution that Darwin parted, Ma to Isia, asking advice on a short article he had written to Darwin's company, with both Lamarck and his own grandfather. Dismay it contained the idea of. In his book, Origin of Species, first published in 1859, Natural Selection. Wallace did not. A joint sentiment intérieur with random variation that was heritable. Publication was hastily arranged. Regarding the origin of this variation, he was a little vague. He thought that it might be due to environmental influences on the gonads, and he was equally vague about the mechanism of inheritance. What he was perfectly clear about was that no matter how the variation originated, it did so without any reference to the needs of the organism. Moreover, for Darwin, the variation upon which evolution was based involved very small continuous changes away from the original form. He accepted that large abrupt changes might occur, but claimed these were rare and most led to monstrosities. Finally, instead of Lamarck's mysterious struggling for perfection, Darwin explained evolution in terms of a completely ordinary and non-mysterious process. Darwin observed that animal and plant breeders had, by the selective breeding of variants, been able to effect considerable changes in the form of domestic plants and animals. This was artificial selection. Similarly, he thought that the struggle between organisms in an overcrowded world by finite resources would ensure that only the fittest survive, and this would lead to a kind of natural selection of variants. The gist of Darwin-Wallace theory of natural selection was as follows. 1. Individuals within species show considerable but continuous variation in the form and physiology. 2. This variation arises in a random fashion and is heritable. 3. The potential for increase within populations of animals and plants is considerable. 4. Since resources are limited, so individuals in a population struggle for their own existence and that of their offsprings. 5. Hence, only some, what Darwin called the fittest, survive and leave offsprings with the same traits. 6. Through this natural selection of the fittest, species become represented by individuals which are better and better adapted.